Thank you, Ms Schuster. Yes, Mr Futrell.
May it please the Commissioner, I don't have any further questions for the...
All right, thank you. Does anyone wish to cross-examine?
I applied for leave to cross-examine.
Mr Dharmananda.
Thank you. Ms Fuster, you expressed in your witness statement your desire to serve on the board of Burswood Limited. Do you recall that paragraph?
Yes,
2?
Mr Dharmananda, I do.
And you expressed that interest because you saw the Crown Perth complex as an iconic part of the social fabric of Western Australia.
Yes?
So I'm sorry, Mr Dharmananda, I think I overlooked this. Perhaps you could just remind Ms Fuster for whom you are acting or for who you represent.
I think Ms Fuster knows, but I'll... you do know Ms Fuster.
You do act for
And
Crown.
if each council
Yes.
could do that as they come to the fore.
Ms Fuster, you mentioned in your statement that you also see the Crown Perth as an important employer in the state of Western Australia.
Absolutely.
And to your knowledge, Crown Perth does charitable works in the community in Western Australia.
Yes, it does.
And you're aware that earlier this year, Mr Bossy made available accommodation at the Crown Resorts, hotels in Perth for family and staff affected by the bushfire in Western Australia.
Yes, I do.
In answer to Commissioner Owen's questions, you said that the position with respect to board packs had deteriorated since as time advanced. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
Was that a comment about the timeline for delivery and failures in form, such as there was no matters arising section in the board pack?
I think, Mr Dharmananda, my expectation of board packs when a company goes, the board papers don't have who is representing the board paper, who's put it in, what is their position. Is the board paper there for noting? Are we needing to make a decision? So, yeah, I think I've made myself pretty clear on my expectations of a board pack, and I think when a company goes through a period of crisis, and they all do, there needs to be a heightened level of reporting and communication.
Okay, you mentioned the April meeting. At that meeting, you received presentations from Mr Blackburn,
Correct.
Ms Seegers,
Correct.
and Mr Salamone,
Correct.
and there were also available at that meeting Ms Fielding.
Sorry, Mr Dharmananda, just remind me who Ms Fielding is again.
The Group Executive General Manager, Regulatory and Compliance. Perhaps I'll take you to CRW 701 004 0370. You'll see there that's the cover page in respect of the pack for 16 April 2021, and there are certain people that are attending by invitation.
Yeah, correct.
And so you've confirmed that certain of those gave presentations and others were there attending and available should any matter within their portfolio be raised.
Correct.
Thank you. Ms Fuster, would it be fair to say that your complaints, to borrow a word that Commissioner Owen used, about board packs and the process are directed to improving Crown Perth and the way Burswood Limited operates at the board level?
Sorry, just repeat that. Would it be fair to say?
Fair to say that your complaints
Yes.
are directed to improving Crown Perth and
Absolutely.
the way that Burswood Limited operates at the board level.
Correct.
And in that regard, you would be seen as a fiercely independent director.
I believe so.
And you, having met Ms. Coonan, expressed support for her in the task that she faced in respect of Crown.
Absolutely.
And do you recall communicating with her in around March 2021, expressing the view that you felt very confident about the road ahead and look forward in supporting you with whatever you need from me?
Absolutely.
And in that context, you felt that Ms. Coonan acknowledged the matters you raised and gave you assurances about improvements.
Correct.
You mentioned in the course of your evidence, when questioned by Mr. Futrell, about certain attention or lack thereof with respect to risk at the level of Burswood Limited.
Yes.
If I could take you, please, just to perhaps assist your memory, to a Burswood Limited board meeting hack, the first one from August 2019, and that is CRW.703.001.2702. So that is the 8 August 2019 board pack. And that's your first meeting, isn't it, Ms. Fuster?
That's correct.
And if you go, please, within that document to 2808, you see there that there's a reference to the material risk update and then some statements about risk profile.
Yes.
And thereafter there is at page 2810 a risk appetite dashboard with tolerances.
Correct.
And then over the page, not over the page, but at 2812, there's a corporate risk map. And this was at the level of Burswood Limited.
That's correct.
And then in a similar way, if we go please to a board pack for Burswood Limited of August 2020, which is CRW.703.001.3302. You can see there that that is the board pack for 13 August 2020 at 9 o'clock, and you're listed as one of the attendees. Do you see that?
I do.
And if we go, please, within that document to 3419, and there is again the standard item of material risk update in item 2, and we'll go through that in a short while. But if I could ask the operator, please, to go back to 33. Sorry, I beg your pardon. What number is this? It's on this. The staple is at the wrong point. I can't read the number.
3416.
3416. You'll see there a reference to the committee papers for the Executive Risk and Compliance Committee. You see that?
I do.
And I think Mr. Futrell asked you about some committees was relevant to the Burswood Limited Board. Are you familiar with the Executive Risk and Compliance Committee?
I am now, in terms of, I had a presentation from Responsible Gambling that I requested, and I know in that document it is mentioned.
Thank you.
I'm not aware if it is a subcommittee of the board or if it's an executive committee.
But that's a committee that reports into Burswood Limited, as these meeting minutes demonstrate. It says at the top of the page, for example, the committee papers. Yes, for the Executive Risk and Compliance Committee were circulated on 6 August 2020 to consider amongst things and reports various
Is that
things.
circulated to the Burswood Limited Board?
Well, that's what this appears to indicate. Do you recall those?
I don't recall the minutes, Mr. Damananda.
Okay. But you're aware of the existence of that committee, and you use that committee to obtain information.
I am aware that it says Executive Risk and Compliance Committee, but that committee puts in reporting to the Burswood Limited Board. I'm not aware of the minutes circulated of that meeting.
Okay, thank you. If we then go to 3426. So you'll see there at 2.5, the material risks table, which identifies certain material risks using a code, and then the following pages attends to those in more detail. If we take, for example, 3427, there's then a description of breaches and following. So that's a part of the Burswood Limited board materials.
And I think I acknowledged to Mr. Futrell that reporting for noting do come up, and material risk, I think I specifically said, material risks do get reported to the Burswood Limited Board.
Thank you. With respect to responsible gaming, which you identified as a topic of importance within Crown Perth, was that your evidence, Ms. Huster?
Yes, indeed.
You're aware that there's a new centre to be constructed,
I am.
and approval for that new centre has been sought,
I am.
and you also refer in your evidence to a document that sets out the framework for the task of attending to responsible gaming.
I am.
If we go please to FEW 001.001.0194.
Whilst that's coming up, could we just have clarified from whom approval was to be sought?
It's from the Minister, Commissioner.
Is that your understanding, Ms. Fuster?
Yeah. Didn't know if it was the GWC of the Minister, but that sounds right, yes.
So you'll see that this is a framework which then goes through and attends to how that framework was to be deployed in Western Australia.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Correct.
So it's a framework that is created by those working at Crown Resorts, but then it's applied for the purposes of Western Australia. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Yeah, no, that's correct.
Yes. Thank you. No more questions, Commissioner.
Thank you. Does anyone else seek leave?
Could I just ask
Mr.
a couple
Evans?
of questions,
Yeah.
Commissioner? Ms. Fuster, my name's Paul Evans. I act for the Gaming and Wagering Commission.
Good day, Mr. Evans.
Could I just ask you a couple of questions the first two, in a sense, put the observations you made to Mr. Futrell in response to a large number of questions in what I might call a conventional context of good corporate governance. And perhaps I could have brought up document PUB 00270001 0097 at page 0105. Now, Ms. Fewster, you're familiar with the what I might call the general corporate governance principles?
I am.
You are? Are you familiar with those now in their fourth revision?
I have to say I didn't know that.
Published by the
I
Australian
am now.
Institute of Company Directors and ASX. This is the ASX Corporate Governance Council version. We're going to take you to page, so 105, I think it is. Now, these are the recommendations of the ASX Corporate Governance Council as to the framework for a board. Now, admittedly, this is for a public listed company, not for an unlisted company, but a public listed company, necessarily one which has a considerable scope of operations and considerable responsibilities to a number of stakeholders. Perhaps I could just get you to read the bullet pointed items that are listed on that page, starting it's halfway down the left-hand side and progressing to about 2/3 of the way down the right-hand side. This describes the corporate governance views as to the role of a board of a listed entity in a chart to be embodied in a formal charter. Now, putting to one side the question of disclosure to the public, I take it from your evidence to the Commission over the course of the morning that there is no such formal charter in Burswood Limited which deals with any of those matters.
Not that I'm aware of.
Yes. And it is in fact not your experience that the board of Burswood Limited actually deals with any of those matters in the way contemplated by those principles.
I'd probably see most of them, Mr. Evans. I'd probably agree with most. They do not deal with most of them.
Yes, right. Thank you. I don't need to press that any further. Can I deal with one other topic?
Mr. Evans, Ms. Fewster, while that document's on the screen, because I'll ask you some questions about it later, could you remember the second and third bullet points, setting strategic objectives and statements of value and code and conduct to underpin culture? Just would you bear those in mind that they are in there? Just I'll ask you some questions later about it.
Yeah, sure. Sure, Commissioner.
Ms. Fewster, just to deal with one issue in your statement, in paragraph 58 of your statement, you were asked to address the question whether, how and or to what extent the management of casino operations was given guidance or direction about dealings with the department and the Gaming and Wagering Commission. You recall that? And you indicated in your reply that you're not aware of any direction or guidance given at any time by the board, and that Mr. Bossy was responsible for reporting on interactions with the department and commission in his management reports. Were you aware prior to its happening of a briefing which was provided to Gaming and Wagering Commission in December 2020, specifically on the 15th of December 2020?
I was aware that Mr. Barton came over from, I think, Sydney, and was meeting with Mr. Bossy and the GWC, and I was under the understanding the chairman, but I'm not sure if it was the chairman of Burswood Limited or the chairman of Crown Resorts Limited.
So you were aware of the fact of the meeting. Were you provided with a presentation?
No, I became aware of the fact of the meeting when I caught up with Mr. Barton on the 14th of December. It came into conversation that he was off to have a meeting with Mr. Bossy the chairman and the GWC. We didn't go into any facts. For me, it sounded like a introductory meeting. Mr. Barton had just taken on the role of CEO, new boss.
You weren't provided with an advanced copy of the PowerPoint presentation which was provided to the GWC for that meeting?
No,
Did you see it subsequently?
I don't believe I have.
Were you aware that shortly prior to that meeting, Crown, or some entity in Crown, particularly Crown Resources Limited, had received reports from McGrath Nicol, Grant Thornton, an accounting firm, and Initialism, a specialist in money laundering, in relation to sample testing of the South Bank and Riverbank bank accounts for money laundering?
I can't say I was aware of it before that meeting, Mr. Evans. I am obviously subsequently aware of it because I have read in subsequent board packs. I don't believe at the time I would have been, and the reason why I say that is that I raised with Mr. Bossy the Riverbank Investment Limited account in February of this year. So if I was aware of it, I would have raised it earlier.
Thank you. Were you aware that on the 23rd of February 2021, Ms Coonan and Mr Bossy also briefed GWC in relation to developments in relation to the Crown Group generally and Crown Perth in particular?
I can't say I was. And in the April board pack, maybe Mr. Bossy has made a comment of updating the GWC, or maybe I've read it in the remediation plan, but I can't say at that time I was. And as I said earlier in my testimony, there was a bit of a hiatus on meetings between December and April.
And you were not briefed outside the meeting by Mr Bossy or Ms Coonan?
No.
Thank you, Commissioners. No further questions.
Thank you. Are there any other council who would like to ask Ms Fuster questions? I'm aware that there are some council who are tuning in from other places. I take it that, but the silence means there's no other applications for leave. All right, Commissioner Jenkins.
I have a few questions, thanks,
Commissioner.
And in no particular order, you said that it's your understanding that Burswood Resort Management Limited employs most of the employees at the casino.
I don't know if it employs I actually I know of an employee that was employed through a board pack, but I honestly don't know who employs most of the employees.
So do I gather from that you wouldn't know, if it was Burswood Resort Management Limited, you wouldn't know why that entity employed them as opposed to one of the other Burswood entities?
No, I don't.
In relation to money laundering, you said that there's now a more concerted effort, in your view, to manage the risk of money laundering at Perth Casino than there was when you first joined the board?
Yeah, I think Mr. Blackburn has been a great addition to the Crown Resorts team. He seems to come with a lot of knowledge and experience and has taken an active interest in sharing that knowledge and experience, and is putting, from what I can see, limited knowledge, a robust and clearly understandable plan in place.
So my question was focused to when you sort of saw that change happening or improvement happening, because you said that after the 60 Minutes report in July of 2019, Mr. Alexander essentially denied to you the truth of those allegations. So did you notice any activity or talk then about improving anti-money laundering programs at the casino, or did it occur later?
The 60-minute delegation was around about mid-year. It was
July
somewhere in
9th,
July,
yes.
and my first board meeting was in August. So my first board meeting, there was a paper for a reformed, combined AML program with a memo there saying we've had external people in, and I can't remember who it was, which firm, and Initialism, a AML expert. So my first go, I was like, well, obviously, there's a heightened level of focus on this, and there's now a joint AML program and some action. So at the time, I thought this is a good thing to do.
And so what I'm trying to understand is that it seems that there's been a change in the program and, in your view, an improvement to it, say more recently with Mr. Blackburn. Did that start, in August 2019, or was it a case in 2019 that Crown was sort of saying, well, we've got a program and everything's good?
No, I think Crown did make some changes, probably a bit slowly in 19, and it seemed to have not got traction in 20, and there can be various reasons, I guess, for that. But then come end of 20, Miss Coonan, other external advisors came in and a revised program was approved, and then came February, March of 21, and the employment of Mr. Blackburn and now the resourcing of that area. There's most definitely now a much more targeted focus on it. But as you know, it's going to take time to implement and show results.
Yeah, so that was going to be my next question. Do you have an opinion as to the maturity of the AML CTF framework and program at the Perth Casino now in respect of its level of implementation?
I think Mr. Blackburn has actually done a bit of an assessment on the maturity level and has actually set out where he wants to get to with that program by, I think it's end of 2022 from memory. Do I know specifically where the Perth maturity of AML is? I can't honestly answer that. I can give you a great answer on that one, though.
And in relation to the issue of harm minimisation from casino gaming at the Perth Casino, do you think, you've given evidence about what your understanding is of those issues, do you think that the Burswood Limited non-executive board member, as it is now, yourself, should receive greater training and education in respect of the risk of harm from casino gaming at the Perth Casino?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think in any normal business, with that being it would be a hot topic, you'd have external people come and talk to the board, the senior management, people with different views. From time to time, there'll be an active program to ensure people understand all sides of that one.
And can I ask you the same question about the AML, or first of all, talk about in terms of money laundering? Do you think that a non-executive board member of Burswood Limited should receive induction and education and training about the risk of money laundering at the Perth Casino?
Absolutely.
And should the non-executive board member also receive the same sort of induction, training and education about anti-money laundering programs and...
Absolutely. And I think if you don't work in the industry the whole time, it's like management training. From time to time, you need to do refreshers, and you might know it and go, oh yeah, I remember that, but it's good to get those refreshers and keep it top of mind.
In respect of the regulatory framework, can I ask you the same question? Do you feel that you, and put it in more sort of active terms, do you think that you received sufficient induction in relation to the regulatory framework that applied to the Perth casino?
No, I don't think from where I sit now and how much I know now, which I think is still just tip of the iceberg, I don't think I received enough induction training at all. And the regulatory framework is a complex framework, and it does differ from state to state. So it is again something that should really be addressed at a local level.
Can I ask you whether you were given a copy of the Burswood Property Trust deed when you became?
No, not that. I don't believe I was. No.
And was it explained to you when you became a board member of Burswood Limited that Burswood Limited was the sole holder of the units in the
No.
Burswood Property Trust?
No, I wasn't.
And were the rights and obligations of Burswood Limited as the holder of the units in the trust explained to you?
No.
You've made it clear in your evidence that in your view Burswood Limited should have responsibility for the governance of the Perth casino. Can I ask you, why do you think Burswood Limited should have that responsibility as opposed to, say, Burswood Nominees Limited?
Yeah, I don't particularly. I think when I refer to Burswood Limited is as good as me referring to Crown Perth. So whatever the entity being operating, and I know the casino licence is in nominees, so I think that goes for, I think that's the confusion, yeah, and that creates the confusion for people where there are so many companies and this one does this and this one does that. At the end of the day, it's Crown Perth, and somehow should have a body that manages Crown Perth and all of Crown Perth.
Now, you've given some evidence as to the response you received when you sent your memo and spoke to it at the meeting of the 16th of April 2021. And I'm just interested in the response that you received to that. Was it said to you by anybody, whether it be Ms. Coonan or anyone else from Crown Resorts Limited, that look, you had it wrong, that it wasn't actually Burswood Limited's role to govern the Perth entities and the Crown Perth, that was done at the board level and you didn't have to worry about those governance issues?
No, not at all.
So it wasn't explained to you that as far as Crown was concerned, Burswood Limited had no business to be governing?
No, it was very much, I felt at the time it was taken on board. Ms. Coonan definitely said words to the effect of, those are really good points raised. It's when you're a non-executive director and you don't work in the business, because I raised a lot of stuff that just, you have to work in the business to know some of it unless it's explained differently. And I subsequently spoke to her on the same day in a telephone conversation, and in neither the board meeting or that phone conversation or after that has that been raised with me.
Thank you. It may be in your statement, Ms. Fewster, and I apologise if I'm asking you to repeat something you've already said, but do you know why the February 2021 board meeting of Burswood Limited was cancelled?
It was cancelled by the direction of Mr. Poynton, who at the time was the chairman. I didn't get a explanation to why it was cancelled, no.
Now, in respect of centralisation, I just want to ask you a few questions about that. Paragraph 31 of your statement, you talk about the international commission business. That's a
Yeah.
business being centralised in Victoria. And the question I want to ask is, I am asking, is whether you believe that it is in the best interests of the Perth Casino for the organisation and management of that business to be centralised in Victoria.
I think where it is got such high risk to manage, and your regulators, the owner of your licence is in this state, having all those functions centralised while a business is at a low level of maturity in most of those areas, and I give Crown the credit that in the last few months there's a lot of documents and frameworks and plans underway, but at the end of the day it's still at a low level of maturity in those very important areas. Unless the people on the ground are setting the tone, showing the leadership, and having Crown Perth and the operations of Crown Perth as their number one priority above anything else, it is going to be hard to make significant change in a short amount of time.
Thank you. And again, in relation to centralisation, you say you've been told by others in Crown Resorts and Crown Perth that Crown has briefed a consultant to advise in relation to a more centralised and streamlined reporting structure.
Yep.
And I just want to make sure that I'm right in this respect. Am I right in forming the opinion from what you've said that you've been told that Crown Resorts Limited wants a more centralised and streamlined structure and is seeking advice as to how to achieve it, as opposed to seeking advice on what is the best reporting structure, whether it be a centralised one or a more diverse structure?
From the conversations I've had, which has been with Ms. Coonan and Mr. McCann, I got the idea, or I walked away from those conversations more understanding it will be a more centralised, streamlined function. And specifically when it came to me being unhappy about the board papers, the response came into, well, we're going to sort that out because there's so many board packs and different reports in a more streamlined function. I don't know that that they'll necessarily end up with having a separate board and having to do board packs for Oversight Limited.
So in terms of centralisation, what do you understand by that? Centralised at the Crown Resorts Limited level or in Melbourne, or what did you understand?
Yeah, I don't know that Melbourne or Sydney location wise. I don't think anybody thought anything was centralising to Perth. But I don't know which city, but I was more, I think they already quite a way through to that, where, we do now have centralised executives and, the board structures are probably the one that the external advisors are looking at, how to have less onerous situation for management and the parent company board.
Wanted to ask you about the reduction in the speed of play of electronic gaming machines. You say that Burswood Limited Board was not asked to approve the making of an application to the regulator for the reduction, for approval to reduce the speed of play.
Yeah.
Do you know whether management sought board approval at another level, say at CRL level, for approval to make that application to reduce the level, the speed of play?
I don't know that. And I think the speed of play thing was already well on track when I started. From memory, it was already on the way in that August board pack. But I don't know who ultimately gave the authority to make that application.
Would you consider that a matter that should go to a board for approval?
Absolutely.
So can I ask you about something that might have been more timely, a change that might have been more timely to your period, and that is the deploying of FPOS terminals at gaming tables at the Perth Casino. Maybe I might be wrong about this because I'm just looking at a minute now that I realise that is talking about it, the fact that it has occurred. Had
Yes.
that occurred by the time you came on board too?
It was on the cards, cardless, swipe. I think that is another one that was already underway when I started, and it has now. It has occurred.
So I'll leave that. Thank you, Ms. Fuster. That concludes all the questions I had to ask.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Commissioner.
Thank you very much.
Ms Fuster, just on the AML program and the enhancements to the AML program, you said that Mr Blackburn has in mind an implementation process going through the rest of this year and through 2022. Would it be right in thinking that part of that implementation program would be the training of staff on the floor?
Absolutely.
Have you made any inquiries about the priority given to the question of training of people on the floor as part of the implementation process?
No, I haven't. The first priority for Mr Blackburn's program that we've been discussing and working on is the resourcing of the program, and number of extra resources has been added to the program. There is a calendar in his program, but in terms of the exact training of the Perth staff, no, I haven't.
I understood you to say that the Blackburn enhancement, if I can refer to it as that's not the only one since you came on board, that there were others.
Yeah, so responsible gaming falls under Mr Blackburn as well, I think.
But in terms of the AML CDF program?
Oh, yeah, so the AML, so there were definitely changes and enhancements made, but the framework, the Part A, Part B framework that I've put in that was re-evaluated by, dusted off, and more enhancements to that was done in, I think, about November 2020. And then, of course, the implementation needs the right people. So Mr Blackburn was recruited and needed to pass probity, and he's now well underway putting the team together and adding more resources to be able to fulfil the function.
Well, do you have any knowledge of, in the period 2020 through early 2021, of any increased levels of training of staff on the floor at the Perth Casino?
I don't know about increased level of training, no. There's definitely AML training, and all staff, depending on where you are within the business, get certain modules of training, the same with responsible gambling, but I don't know about the increased level of training.
Now, you mentioned in your witness statement that part of your induction process as a director was a briefing followed by a guided tour of the physical facilities.
Correct.
Have you since then just taken a trip through the physical facilities to see for yourself areas that have come up that might affect the sort of things we're talking about?
I have most definitely spent a bit of time at the entire complex, including the gaming floor, table games, and electronic games, more to observe and familiarise myself with how it works and to have an understanding of the patrons coming in, and I've done it at different times of day and weekends and weekdays. So yes, I've and then at the other facilities of Crown as well.
Can I come back to the board packs and the board meetings? I think your evidence was that your preferred method of operation is to get the board packs early, to spend perhaps even a full day preparing, and to ask questions before the board meeting. Is that
Correct.
Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
In the periods that I'm about which we've been speaking, so the second half of 2019 through 2020, and then I think I know the answer for 2021. Were you able to do that, and did you avail yourself of the opportunity to ask questions before the meetings?
I hardly got the board packs in those years with any time to go. And I don't know if I've put that in my statement when I've received it and when I definitely do ask Mr. Bossy a lot of questions, either by telephone or by email. Some of them are just education questions for me as a non-casino person. But yeah, I don't think I enjoy asking the questions and trying to get to answers. So yes, I have.
All right, thank you. Now, remember when Mr. Evans was asking you questions, he put up the ASX
Yes.
governance principles. Now, accepting that they were for listed companies, you'll recall that, and I'm paraphrasing here, that one of the responsibilities of the board is to set strategy, values and culture. Do you remember that?
I do.
Is that something with which you agree?
Yes, I do.
Can you relate your experience at Burswood Limited in relation to the board setting and then checking on any or all of strategy, values and culture?
On strategy, no. Yeah, I started in late of a year. Last year was an abnormal year, and I think a lot of businesses probably didn't have what they normally do last year. And this year I have questioned at the April board meeting, and I've questioned Mr. Bossy in terms of the KPIs for Crown Perth. We need to know what we need to achieve. So on that one, my answer is no. In terms of culture, I think it's important, and in my experience, that you know where you start with the culture. And I've questioned, there is now a culture survey run by Deloitte, but the last culture survey was run in 2018. So it is hard to know where your baseline is, which we hopefully will know once the Deloitte Culture Survey project is complete. And sorry, Commissioner, your third one was strategy,
values and culture.
Values. The value program is 4 values at Crown. It was rolled out in Perth, I understand, from 2018, a little bit before the other cities. And, you know, values is what you live, breathe, or do. And having a document with values is one thing, but it's the behaviours and the norms and how it's set and led from the top. Again, one has to do an assessment. I don't spend that much time. I mean, this year I've spent, 4 hours max with people on a video conference, and I've obviously, as a patron, been to the complex, but yeah, it's something that needs to be measured in qualitative and quantitative ways, and have a benchmark and set off with that. So it's more than just the document of rolling it out and publishing it, in my view.
Thank you. The next next topic I want to raise with you goes back to the presentations made by Crown people to the GWC from time to time. And I think you may have answered some of these questions, but so forgive me if I'm repeating. But with the August 2019, in August 2019, there was a presentation by Mr. Preston, and I'm not sure who else went that day, to the GWC about the media allegations. Do you remember that?
No, I don't remember that, but I take it as they did go.
Do you recall that having been discussed? There was a board meeting in August. Do you recall any discussion at the board meeting that Crown management were soon to address the GWC on those matters?
I can't recall that discussion taking place, no.
Do you recall any report being given to you either at a board meeting or outside a board meeting about such a presentation after it had taken place?
I don't know.
And I think you said that in relation to the December 2020 presentation,
Yep.
that you were aware of that had been discussed at a board meeting?
No, I was not aware that there was a presentation given to the GWC, but I was aware Mr. Barton came over from Sydney, and one of the things he did was go to a meeting at the GWC with Mr. Bossy and the chairman, and at the time I thought it was the chairman of Burswood Limited, but it might have been the chairman of Crown Limited, I don't know. But to me, when Mr. Poynter and I caught up with Mr. Barton on the 14th, it sounded like an introduction meeting because Mr. Barton had just taken over as the CEO of Crown Resorts Limited.
In your experience of corporate life, in that situation where either a member of management or another board member has gone to a properly constituted authority, such as a regulator, to present on behalf of the company, would you expect that and the results of it to be reported back to the board?
I'd expect that prior to them presenting, that presentation is agreed to by the board and there be a report afterwards on the outcome.
Thank you. You've been asked about this by Mr. Futrell, but the clause 22 little r and little ra of the Victorian Casino Agreement, you've been asked about that, and I think in your statement you said you weren't aware of it until you heard reports of it being raised in the Victorian Royal Commission.
That's correct, Commissioner.
Have you since read the clause itself?
No, I haven't, Commissioner.
I'm paraphrasing here, but I'll just read you one part of it
Sure.
because I want to get your view on how this would fit with your ideas of good governance of a West Australian entity. And it says that where, in this case, the Crown Group pursues in Australia a business similar to Crown Melbourne, it will use its best endeavours to ensure that the business is conducted in a manner which is not detrimental to Crown Melbourne's interests. Do you understand that?
Yeah, I do.
Do you have a view on how you, as a director of a West Australian company, might accommodate that in terms of what I might call easy and good governance?
I think that pretty much, probably similar to Western Australia, says have Crown Melbourne be managed by people with the best interests and the first priority of Victoria. Victoria will potentially always be a bigger entity and business than Western Australia would be. If you have people managing Victoria, Sydney, Western Australia, somebody's going to be the top dog in that sense, and it just never is going to be Western Australia when it's competing with Victoria and New South Wales.
All right, thank you. Now, my final question, I asked some questions yesterday to ascertain whether there was a view that the structure, as it is at the moment, was sufficiently bespoke to look after the obligations and responsibilities of Crown Perth to the people of Western Australia. Now, I gather from your answers throughout your evidence today that the answer to that is no.
The answer is no.
Can I ask you one further question on that? If a system were to be implemented which is more along the lines that you've been setting out, that the governance and management of Crown Perth is centred in and controlled by, subject of course to reporting to the ultimate holding company in Western Australia, what effect that might have on the shared services model which is in place and the further centralisation of the services?
I think there's definitely a middle ground for, if we call it the shared services model, especially, I'd leave it as there's definitely a place for that. I think it comes down to ultimately the people on the ground managing, implementing and reporting and setting the tone and setting the culture. And I think, in the current case of Crown, you can be a superstar and sit in Melbourne and want to implement a program, but unless you are with the 5,000 people that is your front line and your first line of defence in most of those programs to be successful, it's going to be a struggle to get it implemented to full effect.
Thank you, Ms Fuster. Mr Futrell, is anything arising?
No, there isn't, Commissioners. There is one small matter of housekeeping to deal with, though, which is, you might recall, in answer to some of the questions I asked earlier, Ms Fuster referred to some communications, I think, with Mr Poynton earlier in the year. I've spoken to Mr Power about that. They're going to endeavour, we'll need to take some instructions, I suspect, after today. I don't expect there to be any need to recall Ms Fuster in respect of that, but other parties, if something arises from that, may wish to do.
All right. Thank you, Mr Futrell. Mr Power?
Thank you, Commissioner. I have no need to ask any questions, and the program that Mr Futrell spoke about is already underway.
All right, thank you. The practice that we've been adopting is that a tender list will be prepared later so that we make sure that we've caught all of the documents that are relevant to Ms Fuster's evidence. Ms Fewster, thank you very much. That's been of great assistance to us. Because there's some tidying up to do, we'll leave the summons in place, but you're free to go, and we will adjourn now until 10 a.m. tomorrow.
Thank you.